Welcome to When School's Not Working, our weekly show, Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern, where myself, Michael Strong, founder of expanseonline.co, and my illustrious experts in alternative education talk about when school's not working, what to do, why, and how you can give your child an extraordinary education, even if school's not working, or especially if school's not working. And for the last 2 weeks, we've had guests. We had Peter Gray, and I'll let Kath say, you've got their bios in your head, so I'll let you talk about both Peter Gray and Ken Danford. And so you want to summarize their bios, and then we'll talk about each of our guests for the last 2 weeks.
Sure. So Peter Gray is, so in my mind, when I think about alternative education, like he is one of the luminaries specializing in play and what to do. You know, if school is not working and you want to pull your child out, how can you really nurture and find out and discover what they want to be doing? And one of the ways you can do that is just to put them in an environment and just watch them, observe them, and see what they do. Because children naturally want to play, and Peter Gray really talks a lot about that and how to create environments, how to find environments for your child to really explore and learn how to understand what they really want to be doing and how they want to be learning. And he's just an amazing person to talk to because he has so much wisdom and experience. So he was on last week, and then we also had Ken Danford, and Ken Danford started this whole organization of different learning environments for children who have come out of the school system, and particularly teens. They've come out of the school system because it wasn't working for them. Maybe they got a lot of anxiety from that. Maybe they just really didn't like the whole rigmarole that's associated with school. And he's created this whole network of teen environments for learners that have come out of the school system, and they are now discovering how they want to learn. And yes, they do self-directed learning, but they could be doing any kind of learning that is available. And what we've discovered, I think, if I'm talking about Andrew and Michael and Tori, is that there is a whole world of different alternatives out there that teens and all children actually can partake in, and that every parent can discover if they do some exploring. And we've been out there in that environment for a long time. We've seen a lot of different alternatives. So we know that so many families are choosing to go and take that scenic route, I would say, of education, where they're going out there and exploring all the different options. And we're actually creating options as well as discovering options and providing opportunities for you to create a really interesting and alternative pathway for your child that will really light them up and get them excited about learning again. Because obviously, if you are pulling your child out of school, it's because school has not been successful for you. And we want to give you really solid and amazing alternatives to what is offered in the school system.
So before turning it over to Andrew and Tori to comment, when you say, Kath, so that was beautiful, except when you say, obviously, if you're pulling your child out of the system, school has not been successful for you. I would want to highlight, right, that many people believe it's successful when in fact it's not. And so I would also add, many people who think it has been successful realize that it wasn't, despite perceived success. So just that little nuance.
No, I mean, I've experienced it myself. I pull my children out of school, right? And school is really optional. It's not necessary. I mean, there are amazing options out there available for you, just for the taking. However, a lot of people stay with the devil they know because they know it, and society gives them the impression that they need to stay there, but they really don't. And there are millions of successful children out there to prove any doubtful parent otherwise.
Right, and again, my favorite students are those who are succeeding in leave. Just to give you one case, I know of a young man who is valedictorian of his class, and he dropped out a couple months before the end of school because he realized school was a waste of time. I thought, that's my ideal. You know, you've succeeded by any, you know, valedictorian is supposed to be a big thing. You realize, no, this is ridiculous. So, but I want to go into what were the most striking points. Maybe we'll start with Peter. What do our other colleagues think of Peter Gray's most striking perspective?
I loved his own path of discovery, right? It was his own kids, right? And I think many of us end up shedding these mental models because our own kids who are close to us, right, who we know and trust and love, right, can see, they can see us, you know, cooking the frog in the water, right? It's like we're connected to this child. This child's amazing, right? We tell them all kinds of things. We bring them up, like, you know, right, and then they're giving us a really inside out view of what's going on in education. And I think that was a great thing to hear from Peter, because you could tell he had a great relationship, and his kids were like, this is wrong. All the things that you taught me in life, I'm imagining this, he didn't say this, but I'm imagining this great connection between parent and child and purpose and everything. And then your child going like, oh, by the way, this isn't it. Right. And what you went through, Dad, right, might have been okay at that time. Maybe it wasn't as all encompassing. Maybe it wasn't as all incredibly high pressure. Maybe it wasn't so focused on test scores and getting into the best college, because, you know, we weren't as obsessed about that. But I thought that was just a neat part to hear how his own family helped him come to this realization.
Yeah, just to echo that, Peter Gray, I think of as the leading academic advocate of self-directed education. And you would know better than I, Kath, but I don't think there's anybody who even comes close to Peter. And to hear that it came from his own child going to Sudbury and succeeding was gratifying. Always like, he writes a column in Psychology Today and has for many years. It's very passionate and informed, scholarly informed with respect to self-directed education, and knowing that ultimately goes back to his own personal experience as a father somehow was gratifying. Other perspectives on Peter Gray?
I gotta say, the self-directed, in my ex-stepdaughter, former stepdaughter, when in high school, for health reasons, had to homeschool. And I thought, okay, this is going to be a ton of work. I'm going to be the one trying to figure out how to organize her education. And she just stepped up and organized it. I have never seen anything like it. It was amazing. I really did very little. And she laid out like, here's my plan. Here's how I'm going to cover all the subjects. Here's all the things I'm going to do to get into college. Here are the tests I'm going to take. She really laid it all out. And that was sort of my first eye-opening event around self-directed education and how powerful that could be. And you can tell that they're much more motivated when they've come up with their own plan. They know what they want to learn. They're executing on it. And you're not having to micromanage them. It's now, to be fair, she was 15, 16. That definitely made it easier, but it was definitely a eye-opening experience.
I like to think like we want our kids to learn how to make decisions. Well, how about we start by letting them make decisions? Right.
Crazy talk. Absolutely nuts.
But I think it's like, as adults, and I'm gonna say I'm as guilty. I'm more guilty than the rest of you, right? I'm a late entrant to this party. I think I believe thoroughly in the system. I bought a house where I bought a house. I had kids that were succeeding in the system, right? I thought that's what you were supposed to do, right? and controlling and driving my kids to and believing what's coming from the system and saying, hey, this is what you need to do, right? I think that over involvement as a culture and as parents and as a school system has just gone so haywire, right? To the point where we stop our kids from actually learning how to make decisions that they need to thrive in this world. And whether it's the curriculum that you're being told, whether it's parents that are responding to what we feel are what we're learning from the people around us, that you need to be successful in life, right? All these things, we rob our kids of the very opportunities to make the decisions and experience the learning that they actually need to be successful. It's like this great paradox. I want you to be successful, so I'm going to tell you what to do, which will stop you from being successful.
Well, and that leads me to something that Peter talked, I think, more in his follow-up emails with us, but although play is certainly something he studies, I prefer the term internal locus of control, and shifting the locus of control from the teacher to the student, in part because not everything in fun in life is play. And yes, indigenous cultures, hunter-gatherers, young children play to learn how to adapt to their culture. But I do think it's more complicated now. And for me, going back to what you said, Tori, I think when the kids take charge of their own education, and I, as a both parent and educator, am very proactive in terms of coaching them in terms of how to do it. And some self-directed people are like radically hands off. I will never intervene with this kid's life. Like, hey, you know, what kind of life do you want? Well, if you want this kind of life, this is what you need to do. Let them decide, but still give them very much an informed perspective about, you know, what does it take to get into college? What does it take to get into a good college? What does it take to, you know, get a job afterwards? What kind of a job? But once you give them the information and then they buy into it, if they make a decision and they are driving the process, totally transformative. And then by contrast, I do look at the other as a sort of prison where, or not prison, maybe dependency. I use prison pretty carelessly, but in some ways it's just a dependency that you have somebody else maintaining control over your life until you're 18 or 22 or 26 or 28 or whatever. And then, yeah, as you said, Andrew, if we want kids to make better decisions, they need to make more decisions earlier.
Yeah, you know, I see it like, you know, Michael, like just like going to the doctor these days. You know, you go to the doctor because you're supposed to go to the doctor if you have a sniffle or whatever, and then they write you a prescription without too much thought. But like we really should be thinking much more about preventative health. And I guess that's very, very timely to talk about that during COVID. But yeah, you know, most times that you go to the doctor, it's really just for a very standardized thing, and they just give you the standardized prescription, and there's really not that much thought, it seems, that goes into that decision. But, you know, I'm, you know, alternative education for me, or if you become self-directed and you're self-managing yourself, you then become the person who's looking after the whole of you and all the things that you're doing. And that is what we really want for children, like to go out into life and be really able to self-manage in all of their spheres in their lives. So that does take practice, and it's really great if they can start earlier and earlier and start in those decisions and making those decisions, right? I think that is how you create expert decision makers.
Well,
amen.
I know I would add, often people think it's a choice of that versus academics, but I would add, and I think this is implicit in what Tori said, that if they decide on an academic path, they'll learn deeper, better, faster once they've chosen the academic path. And, you know, I've got plenty of experience with kids, you know, kind of in a D-school period where coming out of school, they might not be very productive for 3 months, 6 months after they kind of leave a school environment because they're used to being told what to do all the time. But instead of kind of freaking out, you know, I'm like, as long as they're steadily taking more ownership over their own learning, when they do engage, then they take off like a rocket ship. So personally, I would rather see a kid, you know, leave school or for an alternative, go through a 6-month period of, okay, who am I and what am I doing? And what do I really want? Then grab onto it and run with it. And it's not time lost at all. And I think that's a scary part for a lot of parents is, wow, what if they don't do anything on day one?
I'll echo that at Acton. That's part of the coaching that's given to parents is like, you're going to see your kid go through this dip. They're used to being micromanaged and told what to do every day, but that's part of this transition, and don't panic. Like, trust the process. Eventually they'll come around. Just look for the slow pieces of progress, because at the other end, just like you said, Michael, they will take off like a rocket once they've built that self-developed.
But not only that, Tori, like, you know, so many people are on automatic, right? They're just on this treadmill, and they get into college and they're doing something that maybe their parents wanted them to do. They haven't really thought that much about it, right? And they get halfway through that very, very expensive college course, and then they're like, actually, I really wanted to be a psychotherapist, or I really wanted to be this. And then they have to completely change course, sometimes even start again. I mean, and these are very expensive decisions, not only in time that they might have wasted where they could have been working on their career and what they really love to do, and they were working for someone else, but Also just a monetary decision. It might, it might take years, which right at the beginning of a career, you might not be making much money, but towards the end of the career, you might be making a lot of money in something that you've been working on over a lifetime, right? So you are actually missing out on the times when you have your maximum earning potential at the end as well. So, I think that taking that time for the self-discovery and really understanding who you are, what you care about, what you like to do, where your talents lie, how you're wired, it's never wasted. And that unschooling time that you're talking about, that time when you're coming out of a situation where you've been spoon-fed and you've been on the treadmill, to really thinking about what you want to be doing and really understanding yourself, and then putting yourself in the direction that you want to go, like that time, I think will always save time in the long term and pay off for you. So I don't think it's wasted time at all.
So Peter, kind of relevant to this, Peter Gray recommended self-determination theory. And the reason that it came up for me is, people are freaked out about grades and test scores in our society. Everything we're saying, I think, if we had a good measure of internal locus of control, to what extent are we self-determining beings? I actually think that for a lot of people, or I'd like to see that become more important than grades and test scores, because certainly in the workplace, and I would say in adult life, just functioning, the more you can, determine yourself in your own direction, the healthier and stronger you are, physically and emotionally healthy, but also the more capable you are in a wide range of workplaces. So if we want an alternative metric, I'm very interested in exploring the self-determination theory to see how far the psychologists have gotten in terms of an objective, agreed upon metric for evaluating this. Because I think we would see kids at Acton and Montessori and self-directed learning and so forth way more developed on this metric. And then ultimately in the workplace, it'd be better. And then fewer physical and emotional damages for kids who are self-determined.
Angela Duckworth in Grit, Angela Duckworth in the book Grit lays out this notion that when people get this determination or grit matters so much more than this talent or this, maybe IQ, right? And in the book, she actually talks about what are some of the theories of where we get that grit from. And one of the ones that she lays out is this choice, right? That you make these choices very early on in your life that, whether it be confirmation bias or agency, whatever you want to label these things, is they become agents of change in your own mind, and they can snowball into capability. So the child that early on decides to try to be funny, but does it on their own will, right? Creates reinforcing mechanisms in their mind that later on, just continue to compound, and they become funnier, and they're constantly working on it and improving on it. But it's theirs, right? It's the agency thing. It's the motivation that really comes from having made that decision yourself. So I don't know if she actually nailed it in the book, because she talks about how different grit is, but I feel like one of the key sources for grit is that agency, is that student choice. I'm going to decide to do this, and I'm going to go off and do it, and that extra motivation that comes with it being a huge element.
So I'm going to just bounce off that, and I certainly sympathize with Duckworth and Grit, but she created with tons of money from foundations this character lab, and instead of doing what you're talking about, Andrew, where actually let's put kids in a situation where they have to take control of their lives, they're doing these, I would say, dreadful little videos trying to teach self-control. And I picture rows upon rows of public school kids being told what to do all day, every day. And then they do, 5 minutes on one of these videos on self-control. And I just want to scream with frustration that why is Duckworth and these foundations, millions of dollars, and not, but still not really addressing the problem. So I think that while the thought piece is right, by not questioning the system, they are completely failing to actually develop real character traits.
I agree. And when she lays out her research, she says, hey, this grit is what makes the difference in people, but she actually doesn't nail how you get that grit, right? So to your point, right, if you're not actually doing the things that generate that grit, what are you doing?
Exactly. Well, worse yet, if you're in a system that actively prevents you from, developing the habits you need, yeah, it's hopeless. So that's our next frontier, is to convince the big foundations, maybe even Duckworth herself, running down the wrong road.
Well, she's already taken criticism, well deserved, I think, around like grit being turned around as just like, well, no matter how much school sucks, you just need to grit it out, guys. Like, just grit it out. Like that sort of mentality, which is completely wrong. I mean, school. I think part of the reason public schools have seized on the grit so much is because it doesn't make them do anything different, really. It just says,
it's
okay,
not our problem, it's your problem.
Right. It just puts the blame on the kids. You don't have enough grit to get through our awesome program.
I see something similar being done with growth mindset. The school's really latching onto that of, hey, you just haven't gotten that A yet. Really? Like you had nothing to do with this problem?
And actually, Joanna C. has given us a link. Joanna C., you want to go ahead and explain the links so we don't all stop what we're doing and go to the link?
Sorry, I was trying to kind of be a silent listener here while my kids run around in the background. But I thought I'd share this really interesting class on. So I've been, just a little bit of context. Hi, Kath, by the way.
Hi.
I've been exploring the self-directed learning space for a couple of years now. I unschooled my second grader about 3 years ago. And kind of in that process, realized what happens, when you transition and kind of de-school myself to not be a tiger mom, and the real child that comes out when you allow them to read entirely on their own for a month because she didn't want to do anything. And that experiment kind of led me to really become more fascinated about what happened when you let them direct their own learning. And game playing and role playing, and just this idea of, I know Acton preaches a lot about gamification and bring gameplay, but I always wondered about what if it's not just about playing games, right? Something more meaningful than just looking at what game can we play. And I came across this class on edX, which can be taken for free, which integrates a lot of the idea about self-determination in terms of the environment that needs to kind of, some of the elements you can infuse in the environment from that theory, and how do you make that a playful experience while making it meaningful. So the course itself, talks about gameful learning and not gamification. And those are the kind of the two pieces of things that I've been thinking about for our own learning studio. We are very small. We only have 5 kids. But we are kind of on this path of exploring what a model can look like when we infuse play, but in a way that is purposeful and meaningful, and really balance this idea of having fun versus building tangible knowledge that they can take on, as they think about what they want to do in life. And I think one of you mentioned about robbing the time. And fundamentally, the reason why we're doing our studio is we realize that this is kind of the golden age that they have to explore, to develop who they are, and to really evolve into the genius that they're born to be. But if we put them in a school, by the time they get out, they're burdened by the reality of life. They're burdened by the expenses they need to pay every month. And that's something that we can't, have that luxury for all of our kids to not work and not pay the bills. So our goal right now as a parent in our community is we want to give them that chance, so that by 18, they don't have to leave a job after 10 years to realize that they were in the wrong field. And that's the long-term cost many of you have talked about. And that's something that is kind of motivating us to do this for our kids and hopefully for the greater community. So.
Yeah, I just want to say, that Joanna's doing something really, really amazing. Envisioning Studios, you should look it up. Amazing 3-hour workshops where the kids are really exploring and doing some very, very awesome projects. So it's very exciting what she's doing over there, and a role model really for parents who want to be trying something new. You should look her up. And thank you for joining us tonight, Joanna.
Thank you, Kath. The one question or even just, something I've been pondering about, which I haven't been able to crack. I was fascinated when Peter mentioned last time about the Sudbury School, where it's kind of, evident that they tell the parents they're not responsible for the kids' education. That was kind of mind-blowing for me, for any kind of institution or even an organization that's supposed to serve this educational purpose, to be able to say that, I feel like was kind of this thing I never thought about. I'm able to possibly consider with people who participate in our community, but just, it's great, all of the conceptual things that we're talking about and exploring. But when it comes down to execution, it has been very difficult constructing that environment where people truly believe in these things that we're talking about. And hiring people who can support it has been very difficult. And that's part of the reason why we're still a group of 5. And I don't know if there are learning best practices or things that people are doing that are kind of helping to put this formula together that actually support it. Just kind of bring that out there.
Huge issue. So just a couple of riffs and I'll let colleagues hop in. First, I've been doing some form of this for 30 some years, and always a challenge has been either I hire experienced educators who bring all of schooling back in with them, but they know how to kind of manage things, or I hire wonderful, creative, unique, interesting human beings that I want kids around, but they may not be able to manage things in a certain sense. And I think one of the benefits of Montessori and Waldorf is they both have dedicated training programs. And my ideal actually is to hire my own graduates, because then they've been through the program. But I think the talent pipeline is huge, a huge issue, because I would differ a little bit from Peter in that, on the one hand, nobody's ever responsible for anybody else's learning. So if you're a teacher and you think you're responsible for kids' learning, no way, especially in adolescence. On the other hand, I also, as an educator, feel responsible for helping kids understand the implications of what they're doing. And so there's sort of a coaching, mentoring part that's not completely hands-off. And I have seen people in the self-directed education and unschooling where, yeah, they have been taught not to intervene and they just totally back off and do nothing. Whereas, I think knowing when and where in any human relationship, in every human relationship, sometimes you talk to your friend about, hey, what about this, or your colleague or your boss or whomever. We care about each other, and part of that is coaching, mentoring, talking, and it can be very informal, it can be almost invisible, but it's not just, I don't care what you do. And so I think that kind of middle ground of how to be a constructive, positive mentor, role model, environment creator, curator, all sorts of things, that's a distinctive skill set that there are not ready-made pipelines out there, except kind of Montessori and Waldorf. So just want to validate, huge issue. It's why we need to grow.
Right. Yeah. And it almost, is this challenge where if we don't solve the root of the problem for how teachers are trained, we're kind of keep cycling this process without much support. Yeah.
Well, and just to add to that, I've seen lots of schools that start out very alternative and then gradually they become more conventional, sometimes over a few years, sometimes over a few decades. But part of it is the parents have conventional perspectives, but also then teachers come in with conventional perspectives. And there's sort of this reversion back to regular school. It's heartbreaking. So that's why I'm most impressed with, Montessori and Waldorf for dedicated teacher training, school accreditation, a program and everything. So whatever weakness is, they've managed to stick to it.
Right.
And I think Sudbury sticks to it by being kind of dogmatic about, their version, don't interfere with kids. But yeah, I'm much more positive coaching than that.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of the spectrum we've been exploring, like how far to the right or to the left do we want to be to be able to balance both.
I would just add one more thing is sometimes I've seen people who have just such immense personalities because they are a powerful personality, they can say, just do nothing. The fact that that human being is in the room directs everything. And other people have such withdrawn personalities that I almost want to tell them, push, push, push. And so when I hear, say, Daniel Greenberg say, I do nothing, I think Daniel Greenberg, I've not met him, but I imagine he's a presence, just a presence. And people don't talk about that aspect.
Right.
Any other? Go ahead.
No, I was also going to say, and this idea of self-directed learning, imagining that kids are happy all the time, and it, to a certain degree, is it really possible to be happy all the time? We're not. It's not an entertainment, right, path that we're taking on. It's this idea that we're trying to build grit in real life problems, but at the same time respecting that autonomy to do what they need to do. So at that hard balance, when we hire teachers, they feel pressure, right? This idea that we got to make it fun, or they are responding with their emotional feedback around, was it fun? Do I want to come back? Those things are all kind of complicating the individual in the room trying to hold that space.
Huge. Just, my specialty is Socratic discussion, and I always like to give the kids really difficult material. And sometimes it's not fun. And sometimes I like to see them struggle and complain. And sometimes they get into conflicts. I love it when they kind of have a meltdown because they're all getting on each other's case. And there's a way to make it constructive. But I would say a huge problem with young staff or, new staff is they do have this, hearing the rhetoric that we use, they want to please, they want to make it fun, when sometimes they should not be making it fun at all. And I think one of the biggest ways I work to develop faculty is to get them to know when it's no, let them struggle, let them flail around for a while. It's okay, let them be miserable even for a while. As long as there's an improvement dynamic. But we need a whole new, talent training pipeline, a language, all of this we're creating because it doesn't exist.
I think some of it's the teacher education, but I also think it's just reflections of how they grew up as well, right? It's very hard, to shed, how you were trained when you were 5 years old, right? And those echoes of your childhood come out in ways that we're frequently not aware of, but have an incredible impact on the people around us. So I think even if you do bring those teachers through that training, it's like, okay, now subtract out, 12 years of how you were taught, right? And good luck doing that, right?
Yeah, well, I really believe that, when I was at Workspace and I was creating these learning experiences for children, I was trying to create the ground that they would be having experiences that they could self-reflect on, because I think it's that self-reflection that really grows them. And yes, they're going to be learning some skills and some things in that, and would get other people to come in to be experts and showing them what they needed to know to do that. But, it's the actual them having an experience and then thinking about that experience and integrating that meaning of what that experience did to grow them as a human. That was the most powerful thing in hindsight of what we did. I mean, the actual products of that class, the artifacts of having done something together, were not really the outcome. The outcome was, what did they learn about themselves through that process? And what can they do now that they couldn't do before because they've been through that? And it's really hard to get someone who's been conventionally trained to understand that they don't have to take something that's in their head and put it inside another human, right? What they need to create is this ground for those humans that they are luckily around. They're creating that ground for that experience to happen so they can have that self-actualization through doing that experience. And that is what's going to forge these new humans. And sometimes the actual stuff that they learn is new knowledge. It's not actually something that we've known from the past. It's something that they've created in the here and now. And it's completely relevant and in context to what they're doing. It's the most important knowledge, in my opinion, right? And how do you teach that to a human that feels like their whole self-worth is in what score someone gets on a test, right? How can you take a person that's been trained to do that and then say, hey, you need to leave that at the door and come in here and create a space for these children to forge an experience that will grow them, and draw the learning out of that actual human, as opposed to trying to fill that human up with something that you learned years ago or is old knowledge or is not relevant to these children, right? It's a different mindset. Sorry, no, please.
I went looking to see what impact teamwork had on learning, right? I went and looked for the research on it, And what I ran across was that a lot of people did a lot of research on group work, and they concluded that group work didn't actually improve grades. Well, if your goal is to get them to score right on a test, you're right? This teamwork isn't going to necessarily help you. But if your goal is to have them, do this discovery, create this new knowledge that might not be something that's on your test at all, which is what you need to thrive in the world today, right? So if your goal is the old-fashioned system, right, you're not gonna give them that environment. If your goal is the self-actualization of this generation of knowledge, of this discovery process, then you've got to shed all of what you've been exposed to probably for most of your life. Right, which is hard.
So, Kath, just when you're talking about this desire to teach and transmit knowledge, and teachers have an ego investment in that, there's a wonderful book by a man named Donald Finkel called "Teaching with Your Mouth Shut," and I love the title because, yeah, he gets that paradox out there, and because I do see certainly what I do is very intentional, and to that extent, very much teaching, but mostly by backing off and observing. And I think that's the sort of paradox that people, again, it's not being completely passive, but it's only intervening occasionally in subtle ways. And I see my role as much more kind of coaching and mentoring the process of the child or the children, rather than in any sense, conveying didactic content. So I'm perfectly happy to spend 95% of my time just observing, seeing when a little intervention might sort of improve the overall dynamic. And I think that, and I've seen teachers shift teaching styles, and some of the best teachers are like performers. They've been taught to be a great teacher means to be a performer, and they're on stage, and some of them are dazzling. And it's often a huge loss of ego and power for them to kind of shift the energy back towards the students. But I've also seen many teachers committed to this sort of make that transition because they believe it's better to empower the students, even if it means letting go of their identity and ego as a teacher.
I think that my role, I was talking to myself, I should say. I was self-reflecting today, and I was thinking about my role as an educator. And I did some really pretty pictures. Thank you, Michael, for giving me the inspiration. But what is the role of an educator, or as a mum? Like let's say that you decide to homeschool. What is your actual role as a mum, and what is your relationship now with your children? Like, what would be an ideal for you as a mum, as the best educator for your child? And this is actually a question I get asked a lot. And people say to me things like, should I do classical education, or should I do Montessori, or the Thomas Jefferson method, or like what curriculum should I choose? But for me, over the time and my time with my children, as well as observing so many different families with their children, for me, it's more of a relationship that you have with the child that is the most important. And what is the relationship with the child that you want? Because this child that you have, this beautiful essence that you have in front of you, in your time together, which may be close to 20 years, right? You want to be, I think, you want to be building their intelligence, right, over that time, through conversation, through experiencing different ideas and talking to each other about those different ideas. You want them to get a really strong sense of themselves, and they get that through experiencing the world and going out and doing different things. And then they might have an experience and then come and talk to you for hours and hours about that experience, right? And that is the kind of thing that really grows their intelligence, but also it helps them understand who they are, and that what they're thinking is actually valid because you're really listening to their experience. And then they think, oh my gosh, somebody's interested in me and my experience and who I am and what I'm doing. And they go out, and these experiences snowball off each other, so that this relationship that you forge, where you are really just unconditionally loving your child, and you are validating their experience, and then you're being a sounding board for that, and then you're introducing different ideas, and then you're putting them in these in these places where they can have this rich experience that you can have these dialogues about. That's all you really need to do as a parent, as far as really cultivating a beautiful, rich, deep environment for your child. And then everything else is really optional. Your child is going to be fine with just that, right? But you can supplement with the world of opportunities on top of that. And it's not actually hard to really listen and to be there and to be that for your child. So, you know, I've seen incredible results in children from just the attitude a parent has towards their child, and just trusting and loving and nurturing that essence that a child has.
But just to mix metaphors here, what comes to mind is, yeah, attention is love, and it's like with a little seed or seedling, you give it flower, and loving your child's mind, you give it the right nurturance, and it flowers. Whereas I look at most of schooling is you have a little seedling and you put a brick on top of it, and you wonder why it doesn't grow very well. We were going to talk about Ken Danford, and we have gone on to lots of other cool topics, but maybe let's bounce around what stuck with us from Ken Danford from last week.
His energy about creating that environment that that lets the youth make that decision. Going back to student agency here, right? I think his passion and determination in creating this environment and allowing, making them feel comfortable and giving them the support to opt out of the system. That's an incredibly empathetic thing that he's done in service, that he's done for so many kids and families.
Yeah, and just the whole idea that you're not stuck. Like, we feel like we're stuck. Like the world is going to fall apart if we come off this system. And if we step back far enough, we see that it's really just a man-made system that's been implemented on us, right? It's not anything to do with your child. It's a system that we just expect children to like plug into, and then they're going to be fine, right? And that is not always the case. And if a child is being harmed, if you see a child who's desperately unhappy, I mean, if you keep them in the same situation, it's not likely that they're going to get happy all of a sudden, right? It's much more likely that they're going to be harmed, and the degree of harm is going to increase over time. If you're bullied in first grade, those people, if you're in the same town, are probably going to be there in 12th grade, and your child is going to have suffered 12 years of certain kinds of emotional abuse, or not feel worthy, or have some kind of scarring from that. And it's very unlikely. I mean, like, you might know a couple of people who had a really fantastic time in school, but I am astounded by how many people I've talked to who tell me that they were scarred from their school experience. And because there are so many alternatives out there that are great, right? To me, you should at least, I think as a parent, that you should at least explore the alternatives, just so that your child feels really, really heard. Because if they don't feel heard over time, they're going to have to either do a couple of things. They're going to have to either rebel against you, right? Or they're going to have to internalize that they weren't heard, and what that means. So either scenario is not good, because they're going to have to resolve it at some point in their lives, and it's going to come out in different ways, and they're probably going to need help to deal with it at some point in the future. So the number one thing that I have discovered through working with families over my lifetime in education has been, the most important thing is to actually listen to your children, because they're the ones that are experiencing that. And even if you don't think that their experience is important, or their feelings aren't valid, right? If they're not heard, it's going to come out in some way that you're going to have to deal with down the road. So if I could put my 2 cents in, I would say listening to your child. And I am just so grateful that Ken has made these incredible locations that teens can go to if they need to have an alternative location for their education.
Beautifully said, Catherine. I want to do a less beautiful version. But one of the things I respect most about him is the fact that he admitted being a young, idealistic educator who was going to go in and change the system and do great things for kids and all this. And we've seen lots and lots of people write that. But he realized early on, 25 years ago, that the system is fundamentally the problem. And you know, the test I always look at is I spend a lot of time in public schools. Anytime I read some school policy or school reform proposal, I think Beavis and Butthead. And the reason is, yeah, you know, you hear all this lofty rhetoric about, you know, new curriculum, new this, new that. And when I say, you know, Beavis and Butthead, we're not born that way. I see them sitting in the back of the room, cracking jokes, being, you know, goofing off and weird, as years of being bored and disgusted at school and going off and doing lots of unhealthy sorts of things. And until and unless we can acknowledge there's a portion of the high school population that is at least as disengaged as that, and in different manifestations. Going to any public high school, you're going to see 20, 30, 40, 50, 60% of the kids tuned out. The whole thing is a joke. It's a charade. And so, you know, kudos for Ken for realizing years ago, this is just not going to work. And a new textbook's not going to solve this. A new assessment is not going to solve it.
A new way of doing math.
Exactly. Exactly. That's not what's going on here. Did you see Ken last week, Joanna, or do you know who he is?
I believe it's I kind of wasn't able to sit through the whole thing, but I did appreciate the idea that he's actually filling a gap where, you know, not every parent can homeschool their kids. I mean, I understand it's a luxury for a lot of people to be able to do that and do it effectively. So it really is kind of an option that I think can really help a lot of kids and serve a lot of families. The part that really scared me is, you know, I don't have an education background. I have a corporate marketing background. So as I was listening to his experience talking about, you know, dealing with drug issues or kind of the teen, you know, the real problems that occurs when you have a group of kids at that age and what can possibly go wrong or right, you know, it is quite a learning experience for me, just having that brief encounter and hearing what he had to deal with, even though it was only 1 or 2 cases over the years, but those 1 or 2 cases makes me think about the type of culture that is happening in that context. And, you know, it just opened a lot of questions for me to think about.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think about that too. And that was part of the reason why I didn't want my children in high school in this country. Although, you know, obviously I'm from Australia and I'm sure that we have drugs in Australia. I just didn't grow up with them. So, but I definitely know in the area I'm living with here in Connecticut, there is a lot of drugs and, you know, and there's a lot of peer pressure and there's a lot of groupthink, right? And like, for me, it's really important for my children to really understand their essence, right? Who they are, to discover who they are, right? So groupthink for me is like what I really hate. I don't want them, you know, to all like, you know, I go down to our local town and I go outside Starbucks. Well, I used to, like, not in COVID, but all the girls have exactly the same length hair and they're all wearing a black miniskirt and they all look exactly the same with the same makeup. Like, I hate groupthink, right? Because it's really the antithesis of what I'm trying to, you know, help my children learn about themselves. And it's not that I don't want my children to have peers, of course. I want them to have a great social life and I want them to find these people in areas of passion and do theatre and do all the things that they really, really love, but just not be in this system where they're just being compared and evaluated constantly and judged, you know, by their peers, by the adults, by, you know, the whole, and by society. Like, it's this like giant pressure cooker. Right. And our children don't have a hope of truly and fully and authentically expressing themselves in that kind of environment. So, you know, I feel like in Ken's case, obviously, he's got a lot of kids that are coming out of that environment and they may have needed to self-medicate to even, you know, be okay. Right. So I can imagine that, you know, there'd be some transfer of that kind of stuff in his you know, in his schools, especially at the beginning, but obviously he's got a very tough line on that. But, you know, we don't really see it in homeschooling. We don't see it outside the school system when children are, you know, are involved in their passions and they are finding friends and they are in a good spot. They don't tend to need to do that because they don't have the peer group pressure and they don't need to self-medicate. It's really those kids who are in a really very stressful situation that need to do that, it seems. We don't see cutting, we don't see these sort of things.
Yeah, almost all teen dysfunction correlates with if the kids are connected to parents and connected to their school community, they're much less likely to do these things. But the fact is, in large public high schools and middle schools, a lot of kids are disconnected. It is sort of Lord of the Flies. And one of my next essays is going to be, we all deserve a bubble for our children. So I think that we should, you know, I know a lot of people in alt ed who are apologizing, well, I don't want to raise my kid in a bubble. I want to scream, yes, you do want to raise your kid in a bubble. It is hell out there. You know, if we had, you know, live cams in the public school restrooms, we would see parents running out of there. You know, the drugs are just part of it, the cutting, the bullying, you know, it's an abuse factory. And so we need to help low-income parents have alternatives where they can create healthy bubbles for their kids. Because I think most of what goes on in most secondary schools is unacceptable by any parents, or should be unacceptable by any parent standard.
I wouldn't want to go back to school.
Oh, it's horrible. It's horrible. And yeah, officially, Joanna, I hereby give you a credential as an expert educator, so you never have to apologize for not being an educator again.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, it's the system, you know, Andrew's still apologizing for it. So, you know, I've created high school diplomas. You get a printer, you get some gold paper, boom. So maybe our next show, we can just get a printer and print out degrees for everybody. Any other thoughts on Ken Danford from last week?
I was just so excited about how motivated he is. I mean, he's been doing this for 25 years and he's just, you know, he's seen the need, just continue to be out there, and he's just so dedicated. He's bought basically the school building and you know, he just really, really loves those kids. So it was just very inspiring to me.
Well, I agree. And since we've only got a little bit of minutes, but Joanna, I'm always excited about people who've newly come into the world. Can you tell us just a little bit about what led you into this world?
Oh, thank you for asking. So I actually went through the system. I went through the traditional path of what it means to be successful. So I went through public schools. Even for my college, I got my business degree from Berkeley, and then I went the corporate path for 10 years. So I kind of went through what everyone said it was the thing you should do. And then when I had my firstborn, I was still sending her to school. So she went through public school. She's still in it part-time while we juggle the studio and giving her some social interactions outside of 5 kids she's with. But in that process, I saw you know, what school wasn't providing, and, you know, being in the career for after 10 years, you kind of know what you need to survive and the people you work with. And there are sharks out there, but there are also nice people, and what team dynamics look like. So you know, kind of all the core skills that you need to really develop into the person that can truly be effective in the field that they've chosen. But I also reflected on myself and where I am in my career, and I wasn't happy, right? After doing everything that everyone said was going to make you happy. And so I started reflecting on myself, and I went through these, you know, few years looking at what is it that I was meant to be, and what was I meant to do, and what would that look like if I didn't have this path. And it was through that process of self-reflection, kind of like what Kath said, like I do a lot of that myself as well. So I went through a process of deschooling after finding that trying to homeschool my child like school wasn't gonna work. So in that first week, we threw out all the curriculum. And my daughter said, I don't want to do any of it. I just want to read. And she only want to read fiction books, which was like, why you only want to read fiction books? What about all this knowledge you're supposed to get? And so, but I just kind of gave myself a time period. Said, okay, you have a whole month. We're just going to experiment. We're going to see what happens. And then in addition, I love baking. So, you know, we do a lot of projects on the side in addition to all these other things. And I just kind of through that process, I saw the magic come out. And it was a different child that I knew, right? I had her for like 7, 8 years. I didn't really truly know who she was. She went to school every day, even though we spent the first 3 years together a lot full time. But I really truly didn't know who she was. I was nagging her homework every night, right? Like the crazy parent who's like, you know, yelling that you haven't done your homework and it's 8 o'clock, you know, what are you going to do tomorrow? So I went through all of that and I saw none of that worked. And then it's like letting go of everything, even my own judgments, is when things started to come to light. I saw a different child. She's a completely different person than I thought she was. And it is through that process. It is so very hard because I think we're bound to have certain judgment about when it's your own kid. It's a lot easier when it's other people's kid. It can be totally unbiased, totally self-directed. But when it comes to your own kids, it's really difficult. So I'm still deschooling myself, but it's been eye-opening for myself, knowing what it is really when we talk about happiness. Even just yesterday and thinking about, you know, this desire for passion. When you're teaching your kids to have desire for a passion, you're telling them that you either have it or you don't have it. You're not just letting it unfold. So when you have something, you want more of it because the dopamine is like an addiction, right? You want more of it. But when you don't have it, then it's like, I want it. So it makes you, either way, you're unhappy. So it's even thinking about like, what is this whole thing we're doing? Not just about education, but as a human being, how do we walk a path that we can fully be content of just being who we are and be able to embrace these opportunities that come up and enjoy it and you know, and survive and be successful in a way that is not about some materialistic thing, right? Like I don't wish my kid to look at Elon Musk as a way to be successful, right? So those are kind of the reasons why we're doing our studio and how I'm reflecting on my own path of who are we anyways? Like what were we supposed to be? And it is with that passion that's driven me to kind of explore education and also learning along with all the kids so I know who I am and I can help them figure out who they are.
So beautiful, so beautiful. So I don't know when we're going to do this, but Kath, at some point I'm envisioning a whole, like maybe a YouTube channel of dozens or hundreds or thousands of people with these autobiographical stories, because it was just so wonderful. And at some point, Joanna, we need to do a whole show around you. So
oh yeah, you have to see what they're making over there
Wow.
in Seattle. Amazing.
Thank you.
But yeah, we're out of time. So thanks much for joining us. And yeah, we look forward to continuing to build community and create a conversation about this so that we're all moving in the right direction. So, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Happy New
Thanks
Year.
for coming, Joanna.
Good night.
Yep.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you all.
All right. Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.